Hi, Soma. Welcome back to Australia. How are you?
Good. How are you doing, Orod?
I'm good. I miss you. How was Prague? You recently attended and spoke in Agile Prague.
Yes, it was amazing. I mean, the whole trip was amazing, given all these flight hours. But despite of that, yes, it was really nice. And I also got a chance to talk about the podcast in Agile Prague. There
Oh,
were a few,
lovely.
yeah, curious people. We were
That's
asking
good.
about it,
Yeah,
so I
nice.
managed to do that.
Anyone talk about Kanban in Agile Prague?
Not directly related to Kanban, but I think there were a few things, yes, which could we can definitely link it back to Kanban.
Oh, lovely. Good. All right. So while you've been away, um, I bought a new microphone, as you can see.
I
And
can see.
also, yeah, hopefully, my audio is a little bit better because a few people complain about the quality of the audio. So hopefully this time, we
Uh,
have
this
higher
also means
quality.
I have to buy one soon, so
Yes,
it's on
yes.
my to-do. I will
And
do
it's
it.
tax deductible. All right. So apart from buying a new microphone, I was talking to someone about Kanban and she told me that Kanban needs a story point. So
Hmm.
have you heard something like that before? What is your, opinion about that? Do you think Kanban needs a story point?
Okay, so the story points, it's really interesting. So whoever you were talking to, I think they brought up a very interesting topic. But in order to understand a little bit about whether Kanban needs story point or not, let's take a step back and understand why do we even need story point in teams. And
That's a
story point,
very that's a very good question. Why do we need the story points in the first place?
so okay, let me tell you what I think, and then how about you share what you think. So story point is not a concept that is in the Scrum Guide, as we all know.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever we see, like any team practicing Scrum, they always focus so much on story point. So one of the things like story point, even though it is not a Scrum practice, it is still being introduced by different teams and they practice it. So benefit of that is that it gets the whole team on the same page about the requirement or the problem they are trying to solve for their customer. So it's not about, estimating their work, as in like we all know how story points are getting used or the anti-patterns regarding to that. But the main reason why it was being popularized was that it is a very good concept to get the whole team together to understand the problem and get everyone on the same page. Now we all know in any team people have different kind of strengths and skill set, but
Mm-hmm.
when you're trying to understand the problem, it is always really good idea to talk about it and understand it from different perspective and different viewpoints, that what we are going to solve for our customer. So when you are practicing story points in teams, the idea is that any kind, either it's relative or it's like planning poker,
Mm-hmm.
it's about understanding the problem from different perspective, and at the end you are coming to a point where everyone is aligned that
Mm-hmm.
what's the problem we are trying to solve. So that's my understanding of story point. Now you tell me, Orod, what do you think that why story point is being used in Scrum? Let's leave the Kanban out for now. So
Yeah.
what?
Okay. So you mentioned that we use the story points to make sure that everyone clear about the problem and they are aligned. Um, I actually wanted to, before I, answer your question and what I think about story point. So can you elaborate a little bit more? Why do you think that story point can help people to be aligned and have better understanding about the problem?
Yeah. So whenever the story points is like, is being practiced, like by story points, I mean that estimations in different ways, either planning poker or relative estimation. So everyone takes their turn to identify a number. So usually the Fibonacci series is being one of the most popular way to story point any given work.
Mm-hmm.
So they identify a number with a given problem that they are trying to solve. And whenever they do that, they have to keep in mind two things, like what is the effort that's being required to solve that problem and what is the complexity.
Mm-hmm.
So you combine those two, take those two things in consideration, and you say something like, let's say to record this episode of the podcast. So we both are story pointing how much
Mm-hmm.
like the effort and the complexity is. So we come up with a topic, and we need to like kind of like give some time to record the episode. The editing is there. So what are the different things that happens before any episode goes to release, like goes to launch or in
Mm-hmm.
different. So there's a lot of things that's happening behind the scene. And now, if we have to story point that, both of us together as a team. So let's say I'm thinking that, okay, the complexity is kind of like medium. It's
Mm-hmm.
not tough, but it's not too simple as well, because there's a lot of things that we need to take care of
Mm-hmm.
before we actually release any episode. And also the topics that we come up with. Sometimes we need to do some kind of, like study or like some research behind it, or we need to talk to each other. So when I combine those two, for me it's like a five-ish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you're taking a scale of like Fibonacci
Sure.
series, 1 being the simplest and like let's say 13 being the toughest.
Yeah.
So five-ish is what I can come up with. So when you are also thinking of the things, so maybe you will say that, no, Soma, I think it's 8, it's not 5, because there's the editing post recording part, which you are totally forgetting because I do most of that. You might say that.
Yeah.
Now, when I see from that angle, that I would be like, okay, yes, that's right, because you are doing the editing, you are putting on logos and stuff, which
Mm-hmm.
I have no ideas about that, how much effort that goes into it or the complexity of it.
Mm-hmm.
But when I hear from your perspective that, okay, what happens post recording, I'm getting a better understanding of the problem we are trying to solve.
Sure.
That is, releasing an episode. So in that way, a team can be aligned what the problem they are trying to solve, and all the things that is required to solve that problem.
Yeah.
So that's the example. Then maybe like I will change my mind and say, okay, Orod, I agree. It's an 8 that is
Yes.
required to release an
So
episode.
I, to be honest, don't want to spend too much time and explain story points, but you can also make sure that everyone contribute and into the estimation and ask question, even if you use day or time to estimate how long it's gonna take. So my understanding about story point very quickly, because the topic is not what is story point, the topic is do we need story point in Kanban. But my understanding about story point is we used to use um, day, for example, or time to estimate how long the task will take. But over time, we realized that when you have a repetitive work, which is more predictable, then probably day or time will be a good unit of measure to estimate how long it's going to take. But when we deal with a different type of work, knowledge work, which is basically our focus in this podcast and Agile and Kanban, it's very difficult to understand how long this task
Yes.
will take, because depends on the person, the knowledge, the background and experience of this person. Plus this work, it's not just an individual task, it's normally, most probably, it's a teamwork. So there are lots of more complex factor involved in knowledge work. So we came up with this new unit of measure and call it story point. And different people have different interpretations. Some people say story point, it's the effort for the team um, to basically estimate the complexity of the work and the entire effort end to end from define until done. However, I also heard that some people, say story point also represent the business value. So if something is bigger, so it probably has a, bigger business value, and help business to decide, do we want to invest on this piece of work, or it's too big and, it's above our threshold. We don't want to invest on this one, or we want to break it to different type of work, like, I don't know, investigation and stuff like that, to learn a little bit more about it. And Scrum team normally use story point to quantify their capacity, because they need to plan to achieve one or multiple goals during this time box sprint. And they use story points to quantify this goal is achievable or not, and how many goals we probably can commit to achieve. But as you said, you don't even have to use the story points in the Scrum. If you use day and it works for you, you can do it. If you don't want to estimate, just, commit to a couple of piece of goals, and everyone happy, business happy, team happy, you can do it. So you don't have to do it. So if I back to the question that my friend asked me, which was, Kanban needs story points, or Kanban team needs a story point. I would say, if you want to estimate to make sure that the work is small enough so you can achieve it during your agreement with your customer, then you can use any type of estimation that helps you, and whatever works basically for you, do it. It can be day, it can be time, it can be story points, or can be anything basically. But if it doesn't work, if, for example, you use day and it doesn't work, so you estimate 10 days and it always takes a lot bigger. And one of the reason that it doesn't really, work properly for knowledge work is, normally and naturally, people, when they think about how complex is that or how long it's gonna take, they just think about the process time. When, they assume that everything is ready, there is no interruption, we have CI/CD, we have everything ready, I just coding, right? Or I'm testing. And if I'm fully utilized and I know everything about this, it takes me 5 days, for example, right? And then testers said 2 days, something, they just sum everything, and then you say, okay, 15 days, for example. What it's missing in this type of estimation is the waiting time. So how long I'm going to wait until it will be deployed? How long I'm going to wait until business tells me, what exactly the requirements are? How long it's gonna take the tester become available and start testing this one? So all this waiting time, people can't really think about it, and it's very difficult.
And that is the reason I believe in Kanban, we have, the data available. If you are capturing or monitoring your lead time for per work item types, then it becomes way more like easier to understand that when you can actually deliver something, because you're making your system more and more predictable. So story time, like the story points, what I mean is that it's not necessary in Kanban, because you have the data, you are actually monitoring the data, and the data is also broken down into the work item types. So as you mentioned, in knowledge work, it is not totally 100% predictable that, how much anything is going to take time. And that is the reason we never estimate in days. That's one of the anti-patterns, and people should definitely not use it. If it works for you, that's amazing. But in most of the cases, it doesn't, with all the data and the example that we have. And instead of that, if you just see that, okay, how much per work time it takes, took, because lead time includes the delay as well. It's
That's
how
right.
much work is in the system. So
Yeah.
if you keep that, you will have a better understanding that, okay, 85%, when can you deliver that? And that's a way better way of communicating to your stakeholder or customer, that you are never saying that you will be delivering 100% by that day, because we all know there could be something, that will always just jump the time. But you can be pretty much sure that, okay, 80% or 85% you can deliver by that day if everything is fine, and the rest 15%, there could be always
Yeah. So I remember someone that we said we need to record a proper episode about lead time distribution chart and how we can become more predictable in Kanban with the lead time and no estimation. But you know, even if you look at the lead time distribution chart, which I would ask people who are not quite familiar, maybe just Google a little bit and, you know, have some understanding. But I promise we will do a proper episode about lead time distribution chart. But, you know, lead time distribution chart, it's very helpful. However, if you have a, you know, in your histogram or lead time distribution chart, if you have a long tail, then lead time distribution chart doesn't necessarily help you, because the size of the task are really vary. It can be very small or it can be very large, right? And what we need is, before we commit to deliver something to the business, we need to have some sort of confidence to commit to the work. So to make sure, you know, we can deliver it within our agreement,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So if you do Kanban, and if you are a Kanban team and you do proper Kanban, so as I said, I think you can do any type of estimation that helps you. Over time, when you collect the data, look at your lead time distribution chart. If you have a, you know, if you don't have a long tail, then that really help. Otherwise, I would say StoryPoint can help teams. You can, especially team with lower maturity, because what they need to have some sort of understanding about the complexity of the work and make sure it's easy enough and clear enough and it will fit into our agreement. So
Yep.
if story points help you, then do it. If it doesn't, then yes, you can of course look at no estimation and other approaches. But if story points work for you, then continue using it. If day and time works for you, also continue using. You don't need to change. You change if there is a problem.
Well, one of the things, like what you said, makes sense, but there is a but to it. The but would be, whatever you're using, always make sure that you are trying to understand different perspectives in the team or at the table. Because even if you are estimating in days or hours, whatever, when people have different days or hours they are talking about it, so there will be a reason behind it, and understanding that as a team or part of the team is the most important thing, because that's where you are aligning to what problem you're trying to solve for the customer and what is the best way of doing that.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole purpose of doing any kind of estimations like this, like in days, hours, or story points,
Yeah.
to understand and align as a team. And at the end, it's the people in the team that is the most important ingredient. So if they know what problem they are solving for the customer, they are smart enough to always come up with the better solution. So that's the only thing I would say and add to that.
Yeah.
So whatever works, do it, but always be open to understand different perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, my therapist told me that when someone says something and said but, everything before but is rubbish.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I have learned, so I do not use but so much until and unless I want to make a point. I use however or and, so that people don't disregard the first part.
Good point. All right. So to wrap up this session, I would summarize that we talk about does Kanban needs story points? So the quick answer is no, Kanban doesn't need story points. But if you need a unit of measure to estimate the complexity of the work before you commit to the work, to make sure that you can deliver the work to your customer at the time that customer expected, and story points can help you, then sure, use it. Otherwise, you can use any type of unit of measure, or don't even estimate, which we will talk about it in probably next couple of episodes. So is there anything else, Soma, you want to add?
Oh, and we also discussed what story point is and why was it introduced in the first place. So please listen to that part as well. It's important to understand the basics. and
Yeah.
why
Now
it's
that's a really good point. So before we finish it, I train a lot of Scrum Masters and I work with a lot of Scrum teams. And what surprised me after, I don't know, 20 years that people use story points, still not quite clear about the definition of story points. And to me, when something hasn't been clarified by people over time in last 10, 15, I don't know, 20 years, probably in next 20 years, people have the same problem. All right. Thanks everyone for listening and watching us. That was the second vidcast. And please subscribe to our channel. You can listen to us on all podcast repository as well as watching us on YouTube. Thanks, Soma, and thanks everyone. And we'll come back next week.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Orod.
Thanks.